Hello everyone and welcome back to Amity Bloom. Today is another page in my art journal where I show you how I use the materials that I find readily available around me, really easy techniques, and how you can create beautiful pages in your junk journals so that you can express your creativity through paper and paint. When you open up your art journal, you need to decide what kinds of pages you want to include in your book or include on top of your pages. This page here has some embossing on the bottom. I collaged some book page on the side and decided to take some gray watercolor paint and add a light wash on the top. And the light wash is very important because if you take acrylic paint or something slightly darker, you can lose some of that dimension if you go too heavy. Then on the previous page, I decided to add some vintage paper to cover up that really bright blue, and now I'm mixing together different shades of blue with a little bit of white and adding different types of shades of this color on the side of the page. I want to mute it a little bit as I want to do some doodling on top of it. Now I have this cute little ephemera piece that I actually made a couple weeks ago, and I thought it looked really well with the color palette. Very muted blues and cool tones. And all I did is I took a little scrap piece of paper, folded it over, and made a pocket. Super simple. I am now taking the cutest little ephemera, it's a floating pocket, and I wanted to distress it with some of the leftover paint, just so that it looked vintage and it looked a little bit worn, artistically worn out, and a little bit withered, so that when I put it on the page, it looks as if it belongs on the spread and it's not just something that I put on last minute. When you're art journaling in a junk journal, don't be afraid to use your paints to distress your ephemera pieces or your papers. Paint is your friend. As long as you start off slow and start off with little pieces of paint here and there, you can add them over, you can layer them, and that's exactly what I did with the little tag. Now that my paint has dried on the previous page, I take my pen and I start to do a little sketch of some leaves. See the paint as your base from which you can collage, paint, or draw on. You can use a printable, you can use a little sketch of someone else's work if you're not comfortable with drawing. Have fun with it. If you want, you can start with pencil and then line it out with pen. Once I have drawn in my little sketch of a flower, really simple and easy, I wanted to add some more color, and I thought watercolor would be beautiful as a nice complement to my sketch. So I take some green watercoloring paint, I add some grass as if the leaves are coming out of a little meadow, and then I also take my paint and I do little splashy happy marks. And all I do is I just flick my brush and then I take the excess off with my hand. This really helps if you're nervous about ruining a perfect page because you add those imperfections that gives you a canvas that you're free to explore in. And now I add a little snippet of paper and some stamps. I like to number my sketches in my art journal. And then I work with that little tag and I pass it through my typewriter. And I'm very lucky because my little tag almost didn't make it out alive. It almost got stuck in the typewriter. And then I start to take my pen and I start to put my thoughts onto the paper. And this is one of my favorite parts. I love doodling and sketching and painting, but my heart is where I write my words on paper. And for this spread, I was inspired by my sketch about a garden, and then I had my little leaf that I took from my garden, and I wanted to journal about going through life and cultivating your own garden within you through grace, and how that is different for all of us. And here I'm taking a little bit of some distress ink on the ink pad, and just with my finger, trying to make it look a little bit more grungy and worn in. I continue my thoughts on the other side of the paper. I took some paint and added it on to give me a blank canvas so then my writing becomes the focal point. So if you have lots of different collaged papers together, put some paint over them and then journal on top of them, and they end up looking really beautiful. And I'm just continuing my thoughts about having our own little graceful gardens, each of us in our hearts. And now moving on to the next page. This is the back of that embossed page, and I have my little sketchbook here, and I wanted to draw and mimic that little ephemera piece that came from a Maggie Holmes ephemera pack. I loved the flower, the doodle, and the sketch of it. The colors, they're not my favorite, but I really liked the silhouette of the flower. And that is my tip to you all. Get a little piece of paper, a drawing, an ephemera piece, and try to sketch or mimic as best as you can the image. And I like to do this with ephemera pieces, something that inspires me. And I usually like to sketch first with a colored pencil, and typically in a neutral color that matches my paper so that it doesn't stand out as much. If I don't like it, I can easily cover it up, or I can easily paint over it. However, if you have a wild heart, an adventurous soul, and you want to sketch with a black pen or a Sharpie, then by all means, go ahead and live on the wild side. Whatever makes you comfortable and whatever makes you happy with experimenting in your art journal. I just want to show you how easy it is to use a junk journal as an art journal, and it's all a matter of wanting to do it and not being as scared of using your materials or messing up your pages. Once they have your drawings, your doodles, your words, that's not a mess. That is the character that you're putting into your journal. Now it's time to play with some color, and I ended up mixing two types of greens together. I'm using some acrylic and some gouache paint. And gouache paint is basically more of an opaque watercolor, but you can use whatever paints you have. You can even use crayons or colored pencils. But I like to work with two different shades of green. That way it looks a little bit more, not realistic, but it gives it more depth. It's always fun to practice with different shades and practice your shading with different colors. Once my stems and my leaves are all nice and finished, I go and move on to my petals. And I take a slightly bigger brush and I'm working with pinks and violets, mixing in some white in there. And I am just playing around with where I think the shading should go, where the color should go. You can easily look at pictures if you want to see how flowers actually look like in real life, but I just go with what my gut tells me to do. As you can see, it's not a professional flower, nor will it ever be. It's just what I want to paint in that moment. And I'm taking some pastels, and this is one of my favorite tools. It's some Inktense pencils, and they are ink. They're not a watercolor. It's a permanent ink, and you can layer them. So they're basically like a colored pencil, and then you can go in with water, treat it like a watercolor, yet it's permanent. It's really bright and vibrant, and you'll notice instantly how it changed my little blob of paint into a flower. And that's what I think is my favorite about the Inktense pencils. So just go through, experiment with the curves of the petals, with the textures of the petals, or you could draw a really simple little daisy, whatever you want to do that makes you feel comfortable. Now I'm coming in with a thinner brush to add some highlights. Just taking some white paint, and wherever I feel like it needs to be, I add it. Very simple. Taking some pastels of a lighter green and also adding some highlights on the leaves. And the final step, taking my black pen and adding the silhouette to the petals and the leaves just to make it stand out in contrast with the black of the stitching that's right next to it. I thought it was getting lost, and so I wanted it to pop out a little bit more. And now I'm taking a little bit of some mint paint and adding some finishing touches with my finger. Now moving on to the other page, since this page is very bright and vibrant, I want to keep the other page more neutral. So I decided to use my vintage papers, create a little paper hinge with some music paper, and I am stamping on this flower design on some leftover craft paper from a paper bag and adding some snippets of papers along the edges. And I finished my art journal pages with some stamping and some journaling, of course. And I go back and I appreciate the beautiful creations that I put into my journal. I hope that you all enjoyed this video and that it has inspired you to use your own art journal. And of course, until next time, I wish everyone so much peace and love, and I will talk to you guys very soon, from one journal sister to another. Bye-bye!